Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Liz Owen. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Communications Director at PFLAG National. Happy and healthy New Year to everybody. I know it's been kind of a rough start, but we're ready to dig into some conversation today. So without further ado, let me bring in my good friend and colleague, Jean Marie Nevada.
Hello, Liz Owen. How are you?
I'm good, Jean Marie Nevada. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I'm, of course, as usual, waving to you in LA from Palm Springs. How was your holiday?
My holiday was 2 weeks of, I probably should be working because then I'd have something to do, but which is a ridiculous way to spend a holiday, but I digress. How was yours?
It was excellent. I've become an excellent paint by numbers artist while we were all gone. And I have to admit, on Thursdays, I got a little bit nervous because I felt like I was supposed to be somewhere, but then I just settled into my couch and everything was okay again.
Did you turn on a webcam so folks who would
I totally did. I saw what I looked like without makeup and turned it right back off. It was like, no one should see this.
Good move. Well,
Liz, we will talk to you later.
I'll be back.
Bye. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Jean Marie Nevada. I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. If you don't know about PFLAG, you should visit pflag.org to learn more about us. Every single Thursday, well, we skipped two, but we're back now. So every single Thursday, we get together and talk about something. This is a really basic program, but it's a program that I think gets some really interesting conversations going. So if you want to join us for today's conversation, you can actually download both the article and the questions that we're using for our conversation if you visit straightforequality.org/discussion series. And that will take you to this week's article, which is a really interesting one entitled Chosen Families Ruptured, How COVID-19 Hit an LGBTQ Lifeline. This appeared through NBC News by Julie Compton. And it really detailed the challenges of what happens to your chosen family, the families that we construct ourselves, because often our own do not necessarily accept us, when you are actually not able to gather any longer, because it's created some real strains in some interesting ways in communities. So to have this conversation, of course, I am bringing in some of my friends. And so two of my very favorite colleagues are joining us today from PFLAG's chapter engagement team, Sean Connors and Shachelle Brooks.
Hi.
Hello, my friends. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm still in one piece and we haven't crashed the program yet. So I feel like we are off to a really good start this year. How were your holidays? Did you have good holidays?
It was excellent. We got the Richard Simmons Chia Pet at our house, so things are great.
Life-changing. As soon as this is over, I'm coming to view it. Shachelle, how was your holiday?
It was relaxing. Nice to unplug. Ate my way through many, many dishes that I've cooked, so I can't complain.
I neglected to mention the eating my way through the holidays, but it happened too. So I am so excited that the two of you are here to talk to me about this, because I think you both have really unique experiences and perspectives from your own stories. But I think, working with our chapter network, you certainly have access to a lot of what's going out there. So I want to jump into this article. And, one of the first things that the article gets into is the fact that, in a 2016 study, it was found that about a third of LGBTQ youth are rejected by their families. So at that really young age, having family is important. So this concept of chosen family is really critical. So what I'm curious to know about, and maybe we can start with Shachelle and then go to Sean, is how did you first hear about the concept of chosen family? And if you're comfortable with it, and I think you both probably are, would you talk a little bit about what your experience with chosen family has been like?
Sure. If I'm honest, I didn't really know the term chosen family until I started working in the LGBTQ space. But I do remember when I first came out to my father in Fridays on Father's Day, I told him, I'm bi and how I was feeling about it. And one of his remarks was water seeks its own level. And he was really referring to my friends and the individuals that I've really had as mentors and looked up to. And even if they didn't know at the time, they eventually came out or showed me and gave me skills that I needed or wanted within my journey. So that really it made me look at chosen family differently, because I've been picking up individuals in my life that have been helping me out in ways that my biological family hasn't or have aided me in other ways.
Oh, I love that. And I love your dad's comment. I think, I think it's such an interesting thing to think about. We kind of do find each other eventually, don't we? Sean, what about you? How did you learn about chosen family, and what has your experience of it been?
Well, much like Shachelle, I didn't know that I was learning about chosen family when I was, but my first recollection of it was reading Les Feinberg's book Stone Butch Blues, and just the way that those characters came together and supported each other and really taught other people like how to show up in the norms of our culture was something that was like, I was like, oh wait, there are people like me. I have this opportunity to meet other people like me, and I just have to figure out how to do it. So for me, that was really like life-changing. And eventually I did come to be part of a chosen family, both as somebody who's like receiving mentorship and support, but also now I'm transitioning into this role of sort of being a chosen parent for younger folks or folks who are newer on their journeys, which is like so wild for me. It's weird.
You're old enough to be a dad, Sean.
It's true. It's true.
I never even thought about connecting Stone Butch Blues and understanding chosen family. And the minute that you said it, I had this flashback of reading it for the first time. And you're right. It is a perfect explanation, I think, of how that came together for many people. For me, I think it was a concept that I knew of because I had seen it written about. I had heard people mention it. But it was nothing that I think I really intentionally focused on. But I have one very specific memory, which was the year that I came out to my family. Mm-hmm. I came out and the holidays were coming up. And a friend of mine who happened to be a lesbian, we worked together. Her mom actually called me and she said, listen, I don't know how your conversation went, but you know that if things didn't go well, you always have a family to come to here. And I'll never forget that. My family actually is great about the whole thing. So chosen family was never a necessity for me, but it was a privilege for me. And I learned over the years that, and I think, Shachelle, you made a really good point. There are certain things that your biological family can give you and support you with, but there are certain experiences that we have as people who are queer that our families don't necessarily know how to navigate that. And I think chosen family has allowed me to create this really interesting network of people who have taught me a lot of things. I mean, people who have taught me things about our culture and our people and what it means to be us. And I'm really grateful for that. So can I ask the two of you, how did you interact with your chosen families over the holidays? Because one of the parts of this, the big heart of this article was about when you can't do that in the ways that we have. So Shachelle, Sean, how did you interact with people?
A lot of it was what we're doing now over the Zoom, or if it was just video chatting or sending little notes. I know one of the things that I did differently this year, I've been doing a lot more coloring. So I sent pictures I colored and like sent it to them, just like letting them know little notes that way, which so out of character for me, but it felt nice. It felt like I was giving them a piece of me, and we just found different ways to connect, even when it was a little hard sometimes because just drained. But yeah,
a lot of Zoom time. What about you, Sean?
So I'm in this position where a lot of my chosen family is already spread across the world anyways. So a lot of our celebrations didn't change too much. We still got on Zoom and hung out. We still sort of exchanged packages and cards. Where I missed the most was some of my more like close mentors. We didn't have a chance to come together in person, and we decided to sort of opt out this year and just sort of take a break and let folks be in the moment and remember this.
Yeah, it was interesting. I found myself at the very beginning of the holiday getting on a lot of calls and checking in with people. And as the holiday went in, just that feeling I'm kind of exhausted by this. And as much as I miss you, it was funny. I spent Christmas Eve thinking about the prior Christmas Eve where we had 24 people in our house. And this Christmas Eve, it was family, direct family. There were 3 of us sitting in the house together. And it was a very, very different experience. But it still made me really grateful for all those texts and the various emails and stuff. And even the mail sometimes felt really good just to get something when it finally arrived eventually and finally got there. But yes, so I want to talk about So the article talks about being rejected by being rejected by your biological family because of your sexual orientation, your gender or, identity, or perhaps both. And your chosen families accept you then. But what are the other reasons that people have to find family? Sometimes it is about identity related to sexual orientation and gender identity, but that is not always the case. And I think this is a point that a lot of people miss. So whoever wants to jump in first on this one, I'm happy to hear it. Can we talk a little bit about other reasons that chosen families have formed?
I think in particular, I've noticed it around religious communities, particularly folks who grew up in more conservative religious traditions like Amish or Mormon or, several sects of evangelical Christian. If those values don't apply, folks leave or are not welcome in their family anymore. And I think that that's another way that chosen family comes through, because if you leave one of those communities, you might not have any resources at all, much like LGBTQ people. So you end up sort of, other folks who have left too. And so you hook up with them and sort of get that community that way.
Yeah, because religious identity can be an all-consuming aspect of your existence. I mean, it is your community, it is where you worship, it is probably your family too. I think a lot of people don't think about it. Shachelle, what about you? Did you think about any other examples of where this might come into play?
I was thinking more so about one of the members of my chosen family who would look for other ways to connect because they're adopted and their family, they're biracial, and their family members don't always understand the nature or the cultural aspects of them being biracial. So they did a lot of searching of other adoptive children or just connecting into the other aspect of their ethnicity. So that's
smart.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, how smart. I wouldn't have necessarily thought about that. I know I've sometimes gotten a little bit frustrated. I hear people, inside of our space often talking about this as a unique experience to us, and it really isn't. I think I just saw somebody in the chat actually mention immigration could be a reason. If you're literally separated by geography, which has become very much the case for too many people. But I think there's also sort of a positive aspect to chosen family. And I need to mention this one because it actually just came up before we came on air today. I was texting with one of my PFLAG friends, and she had actually sent me a little video that they had done to promote their chapter. And one of the things that kept coming up was, are you just looking for other people like you? So it was this concept of chosen family as a pathway to community building. And I think that this article very much gets into that. And it sort of also raises how out of chosen family, we have seen our community develop. And Sean, there was actually something we were talking about a little bit earlier when we were getting ready to come on, which you said you found really interesting about the connection between family and house. Could you talk a little bit about what you saw in that?
Yeah. So when I was reading the article, the folks they specifically mentioned their families as houses. And it made me think about how a lot of current mainstream drag culture, and of course now mainstream LGBTQ culture, is from that community. Like the Black and Indigenous and various people of color communities have really set up these houses, which became ball culture, which of course now is drag culture. And now we see RuPaul's Drag Race on TV, right? Like it's pretty wild.
Yeah, I have to admit, when I read the article, I thought didn't really sort of connect that these two pieces were sort of in the same vein, and how one really influenced the other, and it has influenced LGBT culture outside of those two spaces, which is, I think, sort of the most fascinating thing. So the real heart of this article. So we've spent a lot of time talking about the concept of chosen family. And as I look in the chat, I'm seeing people talk about why they have come to chosen family. And there's lots of other reasons. Somebody else, actually, one of our PFLAG staffers mentioned that she actually really sort of leaned into chosen family because of the death of recent family members. So, I mean, it sort of changed the dynamic for her too. But this article really talks about one of the biggest challenges of not being able to be with chosen family in the context particularly of youth is the issue of homelessness. And I was really moved in the article. It mentions one of sort of the moms of one of the houses talking about one of her kids missing. And has not seen the kid, is a homeless youth. And the article actually gave a few statistics that I just wanted to mention. So we know that between 20 and 45% of homeless youth, in fact, identify as LGBTQ. And young people who between 18 and 25 are 2.2 times more likely at risk to become homeless than youth who are not. So one of the really big pieces of this article actually does become about the issue of queer youth homelessness. So the big question, of course, is how do we help? Because, if there's one thing that we know about PFLAGers, it's that they want to do stuff. Shachelle, maybe we can start with you on this one and talk about it. What do you think are some of the ways that people could be helping to either stop the tide of homelessness or perhaps assist people who might be having that experience?
So I was just thinking about the comment that was mentioned earlier about, is chosen family just you looking for people who have similar traits? And I know a lot of LGBTQ youth, when they're trying to figure out what their identity is and they're exploring, they don't always have the words or the way to express that to their family. So there's hesitation to come out, where they may distance themselves from their family. And being able to connect, being able to identify those youths, to be able to empower them and help them and giving them resources so they don't create that disconnect beforehand, before abandoning or being not allowing them to distance themselves from their bio family before something actually happened.
Getting in front of this, not even getting into the conversation about what do we do after people are homeless, but how do we make sure that we don't actually get to that experience in the first place? I think that's such an important one. And Sean, what else were you thinking about that one?
Because I think in systems, the big thing for me that stuck out was being civically engaged. I know we just got past an election season, but for me, that doesn't mean my civic engagement is over. I vote every year, but I also, I give my time and money to organizations that support either legislation or other advocacy efforts to help sort of stave this off, or to help educate people better, but also to make sure that people know that there is a community to fall back on, especially with young people. If we can catch them, if we can't get the prevention efforts in place beforehand, we can catch them and at least try to help them understand better how we can support them as a community. And the same, I think, goes for advocating on a local level, like a municipal or city level, to say, hey, we have this problem in our area. Can we work together as a city to fix it?
And I think sometimes people miss that there is a huge legislative component here, and it's one that you actually can influence as you get to that sort of very micro level too, because there is stuff that you can do. Voices can be heard at every level, but I think there's a lot that can be done there. So I think that maybe paying attention to legislation is probably a big piece of it. There's always questions that I don't write down that we eventually get to, because I just start thinking of things as I talk to you. What I'm wondering about is inside of your experience at PFLAG, working with our chapters, because you're both talking to chapters all the time, you're seeing the work that is actually happening out there. What kind of things have you seen being done that you think are really positively influencing the experiences of queer youth, in the chapter network? Is it necessarily support groups? Have you seen any programs? Can you talk about any examples of things that you think are really good examples that people should be looking for so they too can support, or maybe they can even start up in their community? I'm not popular when I ask questions that I don't prep anyone for.
What immediately came to mind for me, I know there's some chapters that have events very based to just bringing your youth there, and family-oriented events where it's just being together and being able to exchange and to see who's in the area, because it gives the youth another person or another mentor or peer to connect with, and seeing how chapters are also meeting locally, seeing chapters that are close together, having meetings and connecting. You're also expanding your network or your queer community in a sense. So.
Yeah, I love that, because I think, again, it's not directly discussing the issue of homelessness, but it is creating the capacity so that way people don't have those experiences. And in the case of these chapters, we're often working with youth and their parents at the same time, which is kind of a unique environment. Sean, has there been anything that's bubbled up for you that you've noticed?
Several of my chapters do like a PFLAG Gives Back sort of program, and they volunteer their time either getting donations for organizations that serve LGBTQ youth, and sort of having these pop-up meetings, which is another thing that I thought was really cool, to sort of like on a college campus, for example, they would have during homecoming weekend a pop-up meeting, PFLAG meeting, where, you know, your kid might have just come out and you can just show up. And so having that sort of in-kind community relationship is really, I think, one way that they're working to prevent some of this happening.
And, you know, one of the things that I have definitely observed, and I think I've seen come into I think even a bigger role than ever before during COVID actually has been the role of LGBTQ community centers and the function that they play in communities. I mean, I live here in Palm Springs. I know our community center runs a really significantly busy food bank, for example, which becomes a lifeline for a lot of people, but it also becomes a touch point. But I think that one of the challenges with a lot of community centers right now is that they are absolutely positively overextended because of what's been happening out there. That, I mean, as we have all seen, you know, people losing jobs, not having as much resources that they have, the trickle down effect to nonprofit organizations like community centers is pretty intense. And yet a lot of them are keeping that programming going, which is really really important. What about, have you seen any examples of youth doing more organizing on their own? I think we're starting to see some of this. Have either of you seen any youth networks that are sort of popping up, or are they popping up sort of in conjunction with some of these other existing organizations where it's maybe youth serving youth or youth addressing these issues together? Are you seeing any of that kind of work?
I think from my perspective, I've seen more community centers really centering youth voices and really giving them an opportunity to engage in the work that they sort of, where they would have traditionally formerly said, okay, this is a youth drop-in program, you show up and here's what we're doing. But instead they're saying, we want to have this drop-in program. What does that look like for you? What's going to be the most beneficial for you? And then giving the youth the opportunity to engage and sort of build out what they need and want.
Yeah, you know, that's an interesting point. I actually got an email from one of the centers the other day, and it talked about their youth scholars for this semester. And I thought, what a great way to leverage their voices and to frankly get some really great information from them, because they are the people who are experiencing this. They know what's going on far better than we do. And I loathe to say we as old people, but apparently because we are no longer in that group. It hurts to say that. But, you know, I actually have seen a lot of conversation going on the side. So I'm going to see if Liz can pop back in and share some of what she has been reading in the comments, because there's been a lot going on, more than I can read. Liz, help.
Hello. Yeah, there's a lot. So I'm going to go back because a lot of people were sort of talking about, and you mentioned a few of them, but I'm going to bring them up, talking about their experiences of chosen family and why they have chosen family and why it's important to them. Here, Shachelle talking about, you know, family of origin abuse, which is a very common, sadly common story that, you know, that we hear, and why chosen family means so much to them, and that COVID has given them a good excuse to have Zoom gatherings, which I think is great. You know, in my role, you were talking about, you know, one of the things that we're seeing in the PFLAG community is a lot of new use of technology, things like Twitch, especially, where maybe that is not technology, where like Facebook was like the outer limits of their comfort zone, but knowing that young people are not gathering on Facebook, they're gathering elsewhere, is such a really smart way to center youth. Is where are they meeting, going to where they are. We're seeing, let's see. Oh, you were asking about local organizations, Young, so that there's a local, a whole coalition of community groups working together on the issue of youth homelessness, which right now, especially with COVID, is, I'm in Los Angeles, which right now is the hot spot of the world. So I think I get a prize for that. I think it's just staying inside and not having
sending a cookie.
Thank you. But, you know, I think in LA, it's a huge problem here too. And there are lots of coalitions of organizations working on that. I'm going back to, Jamie Henkel brings up a couple of points in terms of the data around the youth experiencing homeless, that of that subset of youth who are LGBTQ+, a huge subset of them are BIPOC
Yeah. And I think that is a huge piece of the conversation that frankly in our community, we need to have a whole lot more. I think the awareness that the queer community is not just white gay men has really sort of finally come to people's full awareness, or more people's awareness than it was in the past. But I think that this also gives us a tremendous opportunity to have conversations about systemic racism and the connections that has to things like homelessness, to things like underemployment, to things like not even being able to get employment, especially for younger people who are so at risk. And I think that if we, those of us who are having these conversations, start forcing that issue more and more, I think there's some amazing stuff that can happen.
And then we also have Leticia here talking about chosen family. And I think you raised this one before, but I did want to bring her comment in on screen as well about the death of significant family members, and that, you know, we all need that dedicated support and love. And I would hazard a guess that a lot of people, especially in the face of COVID, you know, could learn a lot from the LGBTQ plus community and chosen or found family, because we're all experiencing that loss right now. It's different, but there are lessons to be learned from how it's been done for years in the queer community.
I mean, the queer community wrote the book on how to create family when everyone around you is dying. Unfortunately, that's something that we had to master. And I think there are so many lessons. I think one of the greatest legacies of the beginning of HIV and AIDS that we are seeing now is how quickly people knew how to organize. And that's because we had to do it for ourselves, or we would have all been dead. And I think people sort of forget that part. So I think that's fascinating. Liz, could you bring up the point from Jamie Henkel about her business travel? Because I just want to remind
my next one. You must be a mind reader. I love this.
We are all sharing. We're all sharing. It feels like there's one master brain and we're all kind of like attached to it. I love Jamie's point that while she was still traveling, she and I were constantly on the road collecting hotel toiletries. So even these everyday actions that you can take, sort of the little things that you can give. And even now we can be doing that. If you're doing your grocery order and you can have the means to order a couple of extra things and drop them off at the food bank at your community center, that really does go a very, very long way.
And actually, I think that's something you can do. My kids and I used to do that. Actually, we, for a long time, had put together little packs of all of our travel toiletry, and we would just have them in the car.
Yeah.
So that if we ran into someone, and in LA, it was inevitable, we asked, did they want it? Did they need it? And I think we got rid of like a pack of 50 of them in a week. It was
what a good idea. What a good idea.
Let me see. We have, oh yeah, someone was just speaking to your point about representation, you know, LGBTQ, BIPOC representation, about being overlooked. And I think it's interesting because one of the best examples of inclusive visibility is Pose, which, I mean, hits right in exactly what we're talking about in terms of chosen family.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. I think there's so much to be said. And I think this is kind of a unique opportunity to teach people about what it is and maybe how to create it. Because I think a lot of people have benefited from this concept, and that's so important. We have 2 minutes left. And so I want to quickly ask all three of you something, because this is our first show back from the holidays and I missed everybody a lot and I was really lonely without you. So I want to know.
We're ready.
Ready? It's the unprepared one. It should be an easy one. I want to know what your New Year's resolutions have been.
Oh, I can go first. So I know a lot of New Year's resolutions tend to revolve around like diet, like food, but I decided to look at it as diet of like what I'm consuming. So I've been really like altering like my TV consumption and books and like really trying to add other things in that way. So I'm like cultivating a new diet for this year.
Oh my gosh, you're so much smarter than I am, really.
This is spicy. I don't believe in New Year's resolutions because they're not based. They're scientifically not based to work. Sorry, Shachelle. I love your idea. So what I usually do is I challenge myself to learn something new.
And Liz?
So I am with Sean. I don't do them because they have so often led to tragedy, but I'm gonna go with this comment here. Where did it go? I'm going with this one.
Katie.
Katie for the win. Survive.
Wins today. We all just want to survive 2021. And we are totally going to do it. We are really going to do it. We're going to have a lot more fun this year, too. I promise we really are. My friends, thank you so much for coming and joining for the first show of the year and getting this all back started again. I appreciate all of you so much. And Liz, I'm sure I will see you next week again or something like that.
You might. Thanks, Jean Marie.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Shachelle. Thanks, Liz. And thank you, everybody, for joining us again. First show back, was a little bit nervous getting back in the saddle. But as you can see, my friends always make things very, very easy, as do you. So thank you for being part of today's conversation. We will be back next week with a new conversation and some new guests and something new to talk about. As we say at the end of every single show, run fast, laugh hard, and be kind. That is the most important thing. And please continue to wear your mask. We will see you next week on Something to Talk About Live.